Hi class. So in this lecture, we're going to talk a little bit about MLA style, and I'm going to go over some techniques on how to quote, paraphrase, and summarize. So we'll look at some examples of each of those and what I mean when I say, to quote somebody or to paraphrase or to summarize. So we'll go over those terms and how to do them. So let's start with quoting. So when you're quoting somebody, you're using their exact words. So when you have an article written by somebody and you're taking a specific passage out of that text and sticking it into your essay, you're quoting the authors. So you're using somebody else's words to convey information. So you have to, first rule, place any exact words in quotation marks. So you have, quote marks around any exact words of the original source. And you have to also include a citation. So when I say the word citation, I just mean that's the information in brackets that comes directly after a quotation. And in MLA style, it includes the last name of the author or authors, if there's more than one, and the page number. In other, guidelines, if you're using APA or Chicago style, it might be different. In APA, they include the year, but in MLA, it's pretty simple. You just include the last name and the page number, and that's it. So you don't need a lot of extra information in that citation. And just as a general rule, if you have more than 4 words, similar or same as the original text, then you have to put it in quotation marks. Sometimes I even put quote marks around, 2 or 1 word, even if I'm trying to highlight that specific word from the original text. And it's not a word that I would normally use, and it's a special term that maybe the author introduces, then I'll put that word in quotation marks just to highlight it and clarify that it's not my word, it's the original author's words. So quoting is, again, an essential skill. You're going to have to learn how to do it in university. And it's a feature of every essay that you're going to write. So you want to make sure that you're including quotations because that's the evidence. You can't just make up evidence. It has to come from somewhere. And part of that evidence comes from our research sources. So you want to, in some cases, use the exact words of your research source in your paper because sometimes they say it better than you can say it. They say it more clearly, or they are giving specific information that you want to use as evidence or proof in your paper. So that's when you would want to use a direct quotation. So let's take a look at an example here. So in this example, I have the original text here, and this is just from a source, an article that I found that was talking about social media and how it can impact a person's self-esteem when they're comparing themselves to other people's profiles. So that's what this quote is talking about. So as a consequence of chronic or temporary exposure to primarily upward social comparison information on social media, there could be a deleterious impact on people's self-evaluation and self-esteem. Okay, so that's the original quote or original passage from the article. If I want to quote this and add it into my essay, I have a couple of different options. So here's the example of one way to do that. It's using a signal phrase, and the signal phrase is just a way of saying, you're signaling to the reader that here's my research source, and it's basically just including the author's names in your sentence. So you're introducing who said it, who said the quote. And in this case, Vogel et al. Is the author. Vogel is the last name of the author, and et al. Is an abbreviation of to mean more than one. So there's actually 3 authors for this article. And so we use the abbreviation et al. To indicate that. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in another video. But Vogel et al. Suggests that one consequence of social media is a negative, quote, impact on people's self-evaluation and self-esteem. So I've only used a little bit of this longer passage. So I've only taken, the last couple of words and included them into my sentence. So those are the words that I put quotation marks around. The rest of these words are my own words. So the quote is just sort of finishing my sentence. And I'm just including a little piece of the original text. And because I've included the names of the authors here at the start, I don't need to include that information in my citation. I just need the page number. But that's just one way that you can quote from your source. So there are other ways of adding signal phrases for adding your quotations and adding your research or introducing your research. You can use according to Vogel et al. So according to, and then whichever author's name, last name. And again, if there's more than one author, you can use the et al. Abbreviation rather than listing every single author's name. And you can include the full quotation there. So that's one way to do it, but there are other signal phrases. So according to is just one. You could also use, verbs, different verbs to introduce the quote. So maybe the authors argue that, or they suggest that, or describe, or recognize, or state, or write, or describe. Any of those verbs could be, substituted in, and that would make a strong signal phrase. You could use as shown in Vogel et al. And then have your quotation there. Or you could just, again, include a short quotation in their discussion of social media. Vogel et al. Discussed the deleterious impact on one's self-esteem. So in this case, I have maybe a longer introduction, giving a little bit more context about this essay that I read and the authors. And then you'll note the citation comes directly after the quote, even if your sentence keeps going. So that information is there. So if you have the author's name in your sentence, you don't need it in your citation, but you do need a page number and the author's name if you have a quotation in your essay. If there is no page number, so if you are using an online source and there are no pages, then make sure that you're including the author's name, and then you can just omit the citation there because it's not available or it doesn't apply in that case. If there was no author, and it was like maybe, there was just no author to the source, which sometimes happens with online sources, then you could use a shortened or abbreviated version of the title of the article and put that into your citation. But that's, again, there's always an example online if you have a question about, how to cite something. So you must cite it both in text and in your reference page. There are some other ways that you can quote properly or correctly. So you can, again, we talked about the first one already, so using a signal phrase, and that just means including the author's name or authors' names in your sentence, and then using a strong verb, state, describe, argues, etc., and then the quote. So that's called a signal phrase, and then you include your page number at the end of the quotation. So that's the first way to do that, and that's best for research papers because you want to highlight the research that you're doing and introduce your sources, and it gives credibility to your writing if you can, introduce all of the research that you've done for the paper. So this one is really important and to learn how to do. Second way is just to include a full sentence and then a colon and then the quote. So if your quote is longer than, or a sentence or longer, it could be incorporated or integrated in this way. So if you have a full sentence and then you want to add the quote, you can't really use a comma here because that would make it into a comma splice. So the best way is to use a colon. So here's my sentence. So research shows that social media can have a negative impact, gotta correct this here, on an individual, and then the colon, and then the quote. There could be a deleterious impact on people's self-evaluation and self-esteem. Vogel et al. 207. So here I want you to just take note of the proper punctuation. Here is a colon, not a comma, not a semicolon. It has to be a colon to be correct. Otherwise, grammatically, your punctuation turns it into a comma splice or uses a semicolon incorrectly. So it has to be a colon. And then the third way is when you're using shorter quotes and you just want to kind of blend them into your sentence and just sort of include bits and pieces of a quote or from the original text, maybe words, under 4 words or a few words. You can just sort of plug them into your sentence. So in this case, social media can be damaging and can have, quote, a deleterious impact, unquote, on a person's self-opinion. So here I've just plugged, 3 words from the original text into my sentence and given credit to the author because that's not my words, that's their words, and included the citation there, but my sentence kept going and that was all I wanted to use from that text. But yeah, feel free to have shorter quotes, longer quotes, and just be aware of the correct ways that you need to introduce quotations into your writing. You just can't plug them in anywhere. You can't just drop them into your paragraph. You need to introduce them. You need to use a signal phrase to introduce them or introduce your research, or you need to properly blend them into your sentence or introduce them with a colon if that's the way you want to do it. But any of these ways are correct. So the next strategy for integrating evidence or quotations or research into our paper is to use paraphrase. And paraphrasing is different from quoting in that we're using our own words now to convey the information. We're not using the author's words. We're kind of translating it into our own understanding of what they're trying to say and using our own words. So the information is still from the source, and we have to make sure that we're giving credit to that. But the words that we're using are our own words, and they're going to be different from the original text. So we're using our own words to describe somebody else's ideas. So that's what paraphrasing is. And usually you simplify information through paraphrase. It's rare that you would make something more complicated. Usually it's the original text that needs to be simplified or clarified, and it's your job to explain or clarify those ideas. So you don't need quotation marks around paraphrase because it's not the exact words of the original source, but you still need a citation at the end of the sentence. So you still need the brackets, the last name, and a page number if that information being paraphrased can be traced back to a single page. Or pages, page range could also be included in your citation. And as a general rule, you must change both the words and word order of the original source and provide a citation to avoid plagiarism. So there is, again, when you're just paraphrasing something, there is the risk of accidentally plagiarizing the other person's ideas and their writing. So you want to make sure that you're changing both the structure of the sentence that you're restating, and also changing the words. And also you must include a citation for paraphrasing, because the idea is not your own. You've read it somewhere else, so you must give credit to that source. So let's take a look at an example for this one. Okay, so here's our original again. This is the same quote as before. So just to remind you, as a consequence of chronic or temporary exposure to primarily upward social comparison information on social media, there could be a deleterious impact on people's self-evaluation and self-esteem. Okay, so if that's the original, I would say a good paraphrase is going to clarify the meaning of that and simplify the meaning of that, and put it into our own words. So here's a paraphrase of that information. So being exposed to social media, whether this is ongoing or temporary, can have a negative impact on one's sense of self and self-esteem. And then the author, Vogel et al., 2007. So because this has the same meaning as this, but it's in different words, and the sentence itself is different, so I've structured it differently. Sorry, my dog's coughing in the background. You can see how paraphrase is different from quoting. So that you don't need quotation marks. You just need your own expression of what is being said in the original text. Poor paraphrase. So this is an example of poor paraphrase or plagiarism. So it's too similar as the original text, and only a few words are changed. So as a result of chronic or temporary exposure to mainly upward social comparison information on social media, there could be a negative impact on one's self-assessment and self-confidence. So this person has just switched out, a few words. So instead of consequence, they said result. And they said mainly instead of primarily. And instead of deleterious, they looked up negative. And instead of evaluation, they put assessment. Instead of esteem, they put confidence. So they've changed a couple of the words, but other than that, the structure of the sentence is exactly the same. And it's only sort of swapped out or used a thesaurus to change, individual words. And there's no citation included. So both of those things would be considered plagiarism. So even if they had included a citation here, it would still be very poor paraphrase and could still be construed as plagiarism, because there's not enough change of the original passage for it to be considered your own writing. You haven't changed the structure, and the ideas are all the same as the original. So just be aware that paraphrasing, you do need to change both the structure of the sentence, the word choice, and give credit to the original source. So if you're failing to do those things, you're plagiarizing, or at the very least, poorly paraphrasing the source. Finally, the last one that I want to talk about, so the technique of summary or summarizing. This is where you're significantly shortening or condensing information. And it could be, you could be summarizing a whole 10-page article into one paragraph, which is basically what I'm asking you to do for assignment number 1, is to write a summary. So that really makes you work and to sort of understand the ideas and shorten them, condense that information into just the important, or what you consider the important elements or ideas of the article. So summary involves shortening and condensing a lot of information, and it means putting those main ideas of the original text into your own words. And often it means, again, simplifying or clarifying information from the original source. So you want to make sure it's really easy to understand and clarifies that information for your reader. You still, again, must attribute the summarized ideas to the original authors. So if you're summarizing, usually you're summarizing other people's ideas. So you want to just make sure that you're including the names of the authors or the text that you're summing up. And just basically a summary takes a broad overview of the material. So you're not going to get into the specifics too much. You might not have room to express every single finding of the article. You really want to just sort of do the big ideas, the purpose, the main findings, the results. Those are the things you want to sort of focus in on when giving your summary. Okay, so here's an example of a summary that I did for the article that I read. In their article, Social Comparison, Social Media, and Self-Esteem, Vogel et al. Examined the impacts on self-esteem of social media users when they compare themselves to others. Vogel et al. Identified two types of comparison. The first type is upward social comparison, which compares oneself to others who are perceived as more attractive and successful. The second type is downward social comparison, which compares oneself to those who are perceived as unattractive and unsuccessful. The authors conducted 2 studies of college students who use Facebook to self-evaluate their self-esteem after exposed to profiles of users who represent upward or downward social comparison. The key finding of their study was that upward social comparison can be detrimental to one's self-esteem. Okay, so again, the article was, over 10 pages in length, so I'm trying to condense everything that was mentioned in that paper to one paragraph. So again, you really need to just pick up what you think is the most important information in that article. So what it is that they're examining, the purpose of that article. And here I've basically included that information in my first sentence. So in their article, I give the title, give the authors' names, and what they are studying or examining in their article. So in this case, it's how is self-esteem impact, or how are social media users impacted in terms of their self-esteem when they compare themselves to others. So that's what these authors were studying. And then I'm using signal phrases throughout my summary. So I'm using the author's names and verbs in order to give credit or acknowledge where all this information is coming from. So in the next part, I identify what I find are the main findings, or the key terms or ideas of the study. And they've introduced 2 types of comparison, what they call upward social comparison and downward social comparison. So I put those words in quotation marks because that's the words that they used in the article. I probably wouldn't use those words otherwise. So I just wanted to give credit to the original authors that those were their words, not mine. And then they kind of explain what each of those terms represents. And then I also included here a citation that traced this quote directly to the page number. So you can just include the page number there. If it was only just one author, you would just need to put Vogel 217. But because we have 3 authors, we put et al. In there. And then again, when there's a page reference, when I can track back a quote to a specific page, I'll always include the page reference in the sentence. This should actually be right outside of the quote, so I should actually change this. Okay, so this is a good exercise just to correct placement in MLA style. So yeah, you should actually put the citations directly after the quote. We'll add that. Okay, and then finally, you can describe the basic experiment that they did, or the study that they did. In this case, they were doing 2 studies of college students and measured the self-esteem after exposing these college students to various profiles of Facebook users, and then the final results are given at the very end. So in this sense, I'm interpreting the final key finding of their study that I thought was most important, but usually you can find that in the conclusions of the article or in their discussion section. So yeah, that's basically what a summary is. It basically explains the purpose of the study, any key findings or ideas, briefly describes the method or the study that was conducted, and then summarizes the main result or finding of this study that they did. And that's basically your summary. So it's condensing everything down into a very concise paragraph and clarifying any information or conveying it as clearly and simply as possible, so it's easy to understand. So yeah, that's basically a summary. So you want to make sure that you're including citations, using signal phrases. In this case, I used a page range. So in this sentence, I was summing up or paraphrasing the information from multiple pages and just condensing that down. So the description of the studies were actually, on a couple different pages. So I just used a page range to indicate that in my citation. But yeah, that's basically all you need to do. So you could include quotes. You can include paraphrase within your summary. So you might be using all 3 of these techniques for assignment number 1.